All right, hello everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Hands up if you can hear me. Yes, oh, that's a lot of hands. I love it. Thank you, Kristen. And all the data vendors who have assembled here today. So my talk here is called Colorwise. It's essentially the last inch or 2.54 centimeters of data analytics. Very excited that you can all join us here today. It's a huge crowd. I'm having a great time in London, my first time in London, so everyone's super nice. I thought people in the US were nice. Not New York, but other people in the US were nice. You guys are even nice. I'm from New York, I could say that. So my name is STRACHNYI. I'm the founder of Datacated. I'm also the author of a book called Colorwise. It's a data storyteller's guide to the intentional use of color. And the word intentional is a word I'm going to use quite often here because the whole point of the talk, if you come away with one thing, is that when you are choosing your colors for your data visualization, your data storytelling, I want everybody here to be intentional. Take a step back. Don't just throw colors on a page and call it quits. So I'm going to spend about 20-30 minutes here just telling you a bit of best practices about color. So we'll start off with what is color. We'll talk about the psychology of color, touch on accessibility and color blindness, go through some tips for choosing colors and some pitfalls to avoid, as well as sharing some helpful resources that you can actually take back with you for your next data visualization. So I'd love to start off with what is color. I think most of us here see color. We're humans. We can see Andrew Jones here in the bright orange suit. We've got Kristen, you're the so color is essentially a visual encoding. It's a way for us to highlight, show patterns, show trends in our data visualizations. And by the way, white, black, and gray are also colors, and they're very helpful in data visualization. Now, I decided to call this the last inch of data analytics, and I'll explain a little bit here. I run marathons, I run ultra marathons. I know Jordan runs or used to run marathons. No more. He's older now. But essentially, we usually say that data storytelling and data visualization is the last mile of analytics. So this is me from the marathon that I ran in 2021. It's the TCS New York City Marathon. That's the map. We essentially run 26.2 miles across all of the 5 boroughs. And here on the right here, I zoomed in a little bit into sort of that last mile of analytics. This is referred to as the last mile because after all the work you've done for gathering your data, cleaning your data, Susan, I'm looking at you. Yes, data science, again, Andrew, and Christina. After you've done all that, it's essentially a way that you're getting over to that last mile, that finishing line. And that's essentially what data analytics and data visualization is. Now, I'm calling the talk the last inch of data analytics because I see color and the proper use of color as the last inch. It's sort of that last final step. You've done all that work, you've visualized your data, now you can make it even more impactful by using the right colors. So, if data visualization is the last mile of analytics, intentional use of color is the last inch of data analytics. Now, I'll touch on a little bit of color theory here. This is a color wheel. We've got 3 primary colors. We probably learned this in primary school. We've got yellow, we've got blue, we've got red. What happens when we mix those colors? Well, we mix some colors and you get orange, you get green, you get purple. And then if you go on further and start mixing up even more colors, like red and orange, you'll get red, orange, purple, and red, you get purple, red, or, I'm sure you could call it violet. You could come up with names for those specific colors. And then we can further break down this color wheel into half, sort of, into the warm colors and the cool colors. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, colors have impact. And, for example, warm colors, like the reds, the oranges, they're used to attract attention. They're used to, attract excitement. So if you walked around these halls, you'll notice a lot of red pretty much everywhere you look. And I think it's on purpose. I think it's because it's meant to drive excitement. And I'm super excited to be here. I've been waiting for this for months, for Big Data London. And cool colors are there to calm you down. So I'm wearing blue today to keep everybody calm, like the ocean. So that's a bit of that. Now, color relationships. So it is all about the color wheel. The way the colors sit on this color wheel can actually drive your color choices. So, for example, we've got blue here, and straight across we have orange, and those are complementary colors. They actually sit opposite each other on the color wheel, but they complement each other. And we'll touch on this when we talk about color blindness, but blue and orange are probably my favorite color mix if you are at a loss of which colors to choose. Then we've got analogous colors, so you'll see the blue, the light blue, and the green. And those are great if you're working with categories that can sort of be lumped together, they go together. You would choose analogous colors. They're essentially the ones next to each other. And then we've got monochromatic, so that is more of a sequential view, so it's colors that are very similar, but maybe a little bit lighter or have a less of a tint or more of a tint. And you can use this for a sequential data visualization where you're showing orders of magnitude. The psychology of color is actually extremely important. So we've got different sort of buckets. We've got red, we've got orange, we've got yellow, and each of those colors represent some sort of emotion or association. So red, like we mentioned, it's action, it's passion, it's energy, it's excitement. Green is more about health and safety. It's sort of what do you think about when you think of a specific color? That is where color psychology comes in. And why is this important? Well, when we're designing data visualizations, when we're designing a data story, we are typically trying to evoke some sort of reaction, help people make a decision. And the colors that we select need to match up with the story that we're trying to tell. If you're trying to tell a very sad story, you know, don't use Marianne's color of hot pink, right? Like, we're all going to be cheering on. Yes, that's the data whisperer right there. So now, I totally took this out of Steve Wexler's book. I love this graphic. It shows you how data visualization can be used with color scales. So we'll talk to three of them briefly. We have sequential, diverging, and categorical. And these are the three types of color types that you can use. Sequential is essentially the monochromatic one that we just described. It goes from a light shade to a dark shade, and you can use this for showing orders of magnitude. An example I'll use here is if you're trying to show sales and you're trying to highlight who had more sales, you know, which category had more sales, you would color that a darker blue, and those that had less sales would be a lighter shade of blue, and sort of the in-between would have a range. Diverging colors, so in this example, I love it because it's orange and blue. We go from a burnt red orange to a midpoint, which is a bit light gray, to a light blue to a darker blue. And the diverging color type is great for something that has a midpoint and maybe negative values. So an example I like to share here is when you're looking at profitability and you're trying to create a data visualization that has profit where you're losing money or it's unprofitable, you color it a darker orange. When you're breaking even, you'd be in the midpoint, and then when you're, you know, all happy and making money, you're in the blue. Some people call it in the black or in the green, but in this example, we're in the blue. And then lastly, we have categorical. So categorical is essentially categories. So if you have 5 different categories and you're trying to differentiate them in a dashboard, and let's say you have a couple of charts, and each of those charts is showing something about those categories, it's important to remain consistent and use the same colors for different categories, and making sure that each of those colors are different enough from each other that other people can tell them apart. Knowing your audience. All right, audience, it's very important to know who you're speaking to. What does that mean? Well, we talk about knowing your audience in many contexts. When you're designing your data visualization, right, you're thinking through what questions will my audience have, what do they care about. The other nuance you need to think about is what maybe cultural associations do they have? What colors impact them more? Where do they live, right? In the US, for example, we think of red, white, and blue, and that's like, oh, patriotic. So those colors are, so, you know, if you're talking about being happy in your country and patriotism, you can use red, white, and blue. But it's also important to know the context of which your audience is joining you from, as well as demographics. Are they older? Are they younger? Maybe the younger crowd is more drawn to the neon, hot, bright colors, and then the older crowd might like a more relaxed, neutral color. Also thinking through, is this a fun presentation or is this more of a professional presentation? All of that will actually drive the decisions for which colors you're actually going to pick for your data visualization. I have an example here of the color red and comparing 2 different cultures. So we've got the Western culture and we've got the Eastern culture and the color red. So in the West, we tend to think of red as something that's urgent. So we've got urgent care. We have an F on a test. If you fail, it's bright red. You're embarrassed to show it to your parents. We've got stocks crashing. We've got yield signs, stop signs. That's all generally in red as a warning sign. If you go over to the Eastern culture, red is happy. It's the color of luck, prosperity. They use it at weddings and New Year's and parties, and everything is bright red, and that means it's a happy color. So if you were giving a presentation and you wanted to use the color red, you definitely have to keep this in mind. I'll move on to the proper use of color when it comes to dealing with folks who might suffer from color vision deficiency or color blindness. So what is color blindness? It's essentially when you're seeing colors a bit differently. Evidently, as I researched for this book, I realized that almost everybody sees colors slightly differently from each other. And I know that because when my husband calls something blue and I call it purple, I'm like, no, it's blue. He's like, no, it's purple. So we can never agree on what the color actually is. But interestingly, men are more prone to color vision deficiency. So about 8% of the men in here are potentially colorblind, and about 0.5% of women. We lucked out on that one. So, and this is why it's important to consider color blindness, right? So on this side here, we see regular vision. So that's that color wheel again, and we see all the different colors. This is how it would look to somebody who suffers from red blindness or pronoopia. So one key thing I want to point out here is we generally use red and green a lot, or at least we used to. I'm trying to put a stop to it. But red and green look pretty different for people who have regular vision. But if you suffer from red blindness, then red and green, if you remove everything else, look almost exactly the same. And then there's another example of green blindness. Again, there's slightly more of a difference, but you can clearly see how people might get confused if they suffer from red-green blindness. And again, that brings us to our know your audience, right? Maybe do a bit of research, and if you know specifically that somebody is colorblind, then take the extra effort, which I'll get into now, to take the necessary steps to choose colors that are colorblind friendly. When I was at the book stand earlier, I actually met someone, and she said that the person in charge of all their colors is colorblind at their company, so I thought that was pretty interesting, and she said he's going to read this book, so he's going to learn more about his own condition. So what can you do to help? Well, and I think even if you disregard color blindness, which you shouldn't, these are tips that you should take into consideration either way. So using colorblind-friendly color palettes, which I do have some helpful resources that will lead you to identifying some good color palettes, but when in doubt, I would say the blue and orange are a good mix because they are complementary colors. And blue and orange, if I just quickly go back, they typically look different enough even to somebody who suffers from color blindness for both red, green, and red blind and green blind. Using the power of lightness and saturation. So what this means is if we have a very light shade of green and a very dark shade of red, it is a lot easier for somebody who suffers from color blindness to tell those differences. Or the other way around, like a light shade of green and a dark shade of red. Additionally, you can use other visual encoding. So color is one type of visual encoding. You can also use patterns or labels to call things out if you think somebody's going to not understand the differences in color. And lastly, testing your data visualizations with colorblind vision simulators, which I will show you some helpful resources at the end, where you can upload your data visualization and it will actually show you what it looks like to somebody who suffers from different types of color blindness. I personally like Color Brewer 2. It's very helpful, very easy to use. You just upload your image and it'll show you what it looks like. All right, so when we're choosing colors, there's lots of things to consider. We don't have that much time, so I'm condensing things that you'll find in the book. But parts of what you need to consider are the audience and cultural context, which we've covered, just making sure you know your audience. Design and legibility. So not only does color help you tell a story, it can also help your visualization look good. So there's some aesthetics that you can be mindful of to make sure you're not just throwing a rainbow at your graphics. And legibility. So legibility is important because if you place, let's say, text on a certain type of color, you might not be able to see that text. So definitely testing it out on, let's say, on the different screen to see what it would look like if you're presenting, looking at what it looks like in an email, in a printout, in a PDF, and making sure you actually test those things. Accessibility we touched on, so making sure you consider your audience in that sense and color blindness. And then brand colors. That's actually the most common question I get from when people either know I have a book on color or they are aware how passionate I am about the topic. They always want me to answer, like, what color should I use for my brand? Or is my brand good? And I think the answer is always, it depends what you're trying to do here. This is my dedicated logo, so I've got my hex code here. But choosing brand colors is very specific to your industry and also the message that you're trying to get out there, as well as the audience that you're trying to reach. And sometimes it's recommended to use brand colors in your data visualization, and sometimes it is not. And that also depends on the number of colors you have in your logo or your brand colors, and it also depends on what that color is. I have a quick story here about a logo that was the color red. A friend of mine told me that she was hired to put together a data presentation, and the client had a red logo. I won't say which one, but it was red. So, every page sort of shows a competitor analysis of this red logo. We'll call the company red logo. And they compared it to their competitors. And then when they presented the analysis, a couple of slides, on every slide, that red company had the numbers in red, and everybody else had the numbers in black. So when they presented it to their stakeholders, they were like, oh my God, we're doing poorly on every account. Like, we're losing against every competitor because they didn't pay attention to the actual numbers and metrics. They had this instant reaction of, oh my God, that's red, we're in the red. So yes, if your logo's red and you're speaking to the Western audience, be mindful of that. Now, I'll cover 2 common pitfalls that I always see. I usually see at least 10 pitfalls when I look at colors, but I'll cover 2 today. One is using too many colors. I think we get easily excited, and the software that we use makes it super easy for us to add as many colors as we want. The default settings just sort of give you the rainbow, and we need to avoid using too many colors. And then the other part is not using colors consistently. So I'll give you 2 examples here. This is the using too many colors example. So if you notice here before, we have 7 categories. They're all a different color. We're looking at a fictitious metric that goes, from January to May. We're measuring it. And we're not really telling a story here at all. Now, if we go back and think about our audience and think about what we're actually trying to tell our audience, we can use color effectively, where we essentially gray out all the other lines, and we're focusing in on this pink category. Let's say we sell pink outfits. I'm going to keep looking at you here. The sale of outfits goes up here, and you could tell a story, but also you're not missing any of the other details that are supporting it, because you could see, okay, there's some other growth here, and there's a dip there. We could still tell that story with the background images. So not using colors consistently, this is probably my actual biggest pet peeve when I see data visualizations, especially if there's a dashboard and you're talking about the same thing and using different colors for that same thing, or if you're talking about different things but using the same color for those different things. I'll use this very basic explanation. So if you just look at this pie chart, we've got West in blue, East in orange. We move on to also West and East. We're talking about the same actual metric. We've got West region in blue and East in pink. Well, sometimes people do that because they want to spice things up. They might even throw 2 different colors on there. But I'll tell you now that will actually confuse your audience. So it's always good to stay consistent. West region is blue, East is orange, and then keep that consistency for any other graphic that you use for where you're using West and East regions. If possible, in a dashboard or multiple dashboards, keep those same colors. Now, this brings me to my almost last slide. So these are the best practices. It's a checklist. By the way, if you're interested in getting a copy of the slides, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share the presentation. But when you're creating your next data visualization, if you're in this theater, I'm assuming you love data storytelling, you love data visualization, just go through this checklist quickly, or refer back to your priorly created data viz and see, did you use the proper color scale? So those 3 color scales that I mentioned, they're very helpful when used correctly, but they can actually confuse your audience when they're not used correctly. Because, for example, if you're using multiple categories, but you're using 3 different colors for 7 categories, those 3 different colors might make an association for your audience where, okay, those categories must be lumped together. So there are definitely nuances in these 3 types of color scales. The other tip is to use a limited number of colors. So no more than 3 to 5 is a best practice that I share. And the question I get a lot is, hey, I have 10 categories. What do I do? Well, I just showed you an example when we had 7 categories and we highlighted one. The other alternative is to filter your data so you're actually focused in and sharing with your audience only the things that they actually care about. Using colors meaningfully and going beyond default settings. So we use a lot of different data software and maybe programming languages, which provide us with the ability to click on, add color to bar chart, and it has default settings. I actually applaud them. I use Tableau quite heavily, and I applaud them for their colors that they actually throw in there as their default settings. But I definitely encourage everyone to take a step back and consider what colors should you actually use. Think about your audience, think about the cultural context, think about the story, the messaging, the emotions you want to evoke, and then choose your colors. So basically starting with a grayscale mode, remove your colors, think about it, pick the two, 3, or 4 colors that you actually need to use throughout the entire visualization, and then apply color. Using color to highlight important information, that is probably the best use of color. So if you got your whole data visualization, you can use bright colors effectively to grayscale everything else and just use color and point the attention to where you actually want it to go. Providing sufficient contrast between colors, we touched on this for accessibility reasons. So basically making sure that people can see the different types of colors separately. And this is not only for those who suffer from color blindness, this is also for just people with regular vision. We might start to see some of those colors in the same way. Like if you have different shades of pink or blues, maybe consider throwing a very different color in there so you can help it stand out. Color psychology and cultural associations, again, going back to considering your audience. I know I've said that at least 3 times, but it's really important that you think about who you're talking to. And you might ask, well, I don't know who I'll be talking to. I kind of had a sense of who I'll be talking to today. I knew you guys would be data people and you like data visualization, data storytelling, so I had a hunch. But if you are truly unaware of who's going to receive the message, if you're not sure who's going to get that email with your data viz or come to your presentation, I say go with the gray, blue, orange as a safe, I keep looking at your orange too, as a safe bet. So using gray for supporting details and leveraging all the white space you can get. When I started the talk, I said black, white, and gray are also colors. Use them to your advantage. So nobody really wants to see the rainbow. I think it might be good for grabbing attention and making people look at what you're trying to show them. But in terms of trying to get people to understand what you're telling in your data story, use enough white space to balance things out. Use gray for supporting details. And I think when you have font on screen, I think black is generally a great choice. Unless you've got a black screen, then please use white. That will help. And then again, lastly, testing for color blindness and black and white printing. So I know we touched on color blindness, but black and white printing is something that is also important for those who still print. Sometimes you might spend hours or minutes, depending on the tool you're using, getting the colors just right, getting everything just right, to see that your presentation was printed in black and white, and now people can't see the difference. Again, I'll share a resource where you can upload your graphic and see what it looks like, not only for color blindness, but also in black and white. Now, here's the helpful resources here. So my favorite, as I said, is Color Brewer. We've got Coolers, Color Hex, Color Code, VizCheck. Lots of great resources, as well as Colorwise, which is the book I wrote from O'Reilly. Hey, Kristen, you're so good at that. So on that note, I would love to tell you that we have a book signing at 4, where not only I will be signing the Colorwise book, but we'll have Jordan, I think we'll have Joe, we'll have Scott, who else has a book? Susan, there you go, woo! And thank you all very much for joining the talk. I really appreciate it.